Hello, these are sentence pyramids for the Week 5 story in our health textbook for 2024. Our story? I don't understand. We will read the story slowly. We will repeat the sentences as they grow. You can listen. You can also repeat for practice. This story is on page 65 of your health textbook. This is Maury. Maury has a doctor's appointment. Maury has a doctor's appointment today. Maury has a doctor's appointment today at 3:30 p.m. He needs to see the doctor. He needs to see the doctor because he is sick. He checks in. He checks in with the receptionist. The receptionist asks him to sign in. He writes his name, date of birth. He writes his name, date of birth, and appointment time. Maury gives the receptionist his insurance. Maury gives the receptionist his insurance card. After he checks in, he waits. After he checks in, he waits in the waiting room. Maury waits for 20 minutes. Maury waits for 20 minutes before. Maury waits for 20 minutes before a nurse. Maury waits for 20 minutes before a nurse comes out. She says, Maury Smith? She says, Maury Smith, are you here? Maury says, yes. Maury says, yes. And he? Maury says, yes. And he stands up. Before Maury goes into the exam room, the nurse checks. Before Maury goes into the exam room, the nurse checks his height. Before Maury goes into the exam room, the nurse checks his height and his weight. The nurse takes Maury's temperature. The nurse takes Maury's temperature and blood pressure. The nurse talks a lot. Maury Maury doesn't understand. Maury doesn't understand the nurse. He feels nervous. The nurse asks questions. The nurse asks questions and Maury. The nurse asks questions and Maury doesn't understand. Maury says, I don't understand. The nurse asks, what language? The nurse asks, what language do you speak? Maury says, I speak. Maury says, I speak Spanish. The nurse comes back. The nurse comes back to the nurse comes back to the exam room. She has a blue phone. She calls an interpreter. She calls an interpreter and Maury talks. She calls an interpreter and Maury talks to the interpreter. Maury talks to the nurse. Maury talks to the nurse and the doctor. The doctor gives Maury a prescription. After Maury leaves the clinic, he picks up his medicine. The end.